The story opens on Verindel Prime, a world where nature and architecture have achieved an almost perfect synthesis. The trees here don't just grow tall, they glow, pulsing with soft bioluminescence that turns the nights into something from a dream. The buildings rise like crystal formations from the earth, grown as much as built, shaped by Kitharan bioengineering that makes human construction look clumsy by comparison. Nathan Voss had been impressed when he first arrived 18 months ago. Now, walking through the palace gardens for what he assumed would be the last time, he just felt tired and oddly hollow. His mission was complete. The trade agreements were signed, authenticated, and filed in both Earth's databases and the Kitharan archives. He'd successfully navigated 18 months of diplomatic protocol, cultural misunderstandings, and the occasional near incident that could have derailed everything. He'd been professional, efficient, and exactly what Earth had needed him to be. In 3 days, a transport ship would carry him to the orbital station, where a long-range vessel waited to begin the 4-month journey back to Earth. He should have been excited. Instead, he kept finding reasons to walk through these gardens one more time. "Ambassador Voss, you're out late." Nathan turned to find Counselor Tern approaching along the luminescent pathway, the older Kitharan's long ears tilted forward in polite attention. Tern had been one of his primary contacts in the early days, helping him navigate the labyrinth of court politics with patience and occasional amusement at human confusion. "Just Nathan is fine, Tern. I stopped being an ambassador about 3 signatures ago." He gestured at the gardens around them. "Thought I'd take a last look. It's beautiful here. I'm going to miss it." "The Queen will miss your presence as well." Tern's tone was carefully neutral, the way it always was when discussing Lysa. "She has spoken highly of your contributions to the negotiations." Nathan smiled at the diplomatic phrasing. "That's generous of her. Mostly I just tried not to accidentally insult anyone's ancestors or start an interstellar incident." "You succeeded admirably at both." Tern paused, seeming to consider his next words. "You should know that Her Majesty has been quite different since you arrived. More engaged, more willing to challenge the Council's assumptions. You've been a positive influence." There was something in the way Tern said it that made Nathan wonder if the counselor suspected just how much time he and Lysa had spent in unofficial capacity over the past year and a half. The late-night conversations that stretched well past formal meetings. The debates about governance and philosophy that started in conference rooms and continued in gardens or over tea in her private study. The moments when she'd stopped being Queen Lysa Taryn, absolute ruler of the Kitharan Empire, and become just Lysa, someone who laughed at his terrible jokes and challenged his assumptions about power and responsibility. "She's an impressive leader," Nathan said, keeping his own tone carefully diplomatic. "The Kithara are lucky to have her." "Indeed." Tern inclined his head in a gesture of farewell. "Safe travels, Nathan Voss. May your journey home be peaceful." Nathan watched the counselor disappear down the glowing pathway, then turned back toward the palace. His quarters were in the diplomatic wing, packed except for the essentials he'd need over the next 3 days. Everything was arranged. Everything was proceeding according to plan. So why did it feel like he was making a terrible mistake? He found his answer waiting in his quarters, a sealed message cube bearing the Queen's personal seal. Nathan activated it with a touch, and Lysa's voice filled the small room, formal and measured in a way that immediately told him this was an official communication. "Ambassador Voss, your presence is requested at the Royal Spaceport tomorrow at the 9th hour for final departure procedures and ceremonial farewell. Full formal dress is required. The Queen extends her gratitude for your service and wishes you safe travels back to Earth." The message ended. Nathan stared at the cube, feeling that hollow sensation in his chest expand into something closer to actual pain. Full formal dress, ceremonial farewell, everything proper, everything according to protocol, everything perfectly correct and completely wrong. He set the cube down carefully and moved to the window. The city stretched out below, bioluminescent and beautiful, alive with evening activity. Somewhere in the palace complex, Lysa was probably working late as she always did, reviewing reports or preparing for tomorrow's meetings or simply avoiding sleep, because that's what leaders did when the weight of responsibility became too heavy to set down. He'd gotten used to her presence. That was the problem he hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Gotten used to the way she listened when he talked, really listened instead of just waiting for her turn to speak. Gotten used to her dry sense of humor that caught him off guard with its sharpness. Gotten used to the rare, genuine smile that transformed her face from regal to radiant. Tomorrow he'd say goodbye, formally and correctly, and then he'd get on that ship and spend 4 months traveling back to Earth where another assignment waited. Another mission, another world, another set of protocols to navigate. It was what he'd signed up for. It was his career, his purpose. It was exactly what he was supposed to want. Nathan turned away from the window and tried to convince himself that the tightness in his throat was just exhaustion. Tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not. The transport ship wouldn't wait. Earth expected his return. And Queen Lysa Taryn would remain here, ruling her empire with grace and intelligence and that carefully controlled loneliness he'd glimpsed behind the crown. He told himself it was for the best. He told himself that duty came first. He told himself that what he was feeling wasn't important enough to complicate everything. He almost believed it. The royal spaceport was impressive even by Kitharan standards. The landing platform seemed to float above the city, held aloft by the same bioengineered crystal technology that made so much of their architecture possible. Nathan arrived in the formal diplomatic transport, wearing the full ceremonial uniform that he'd only had to put on 3 times during his entire posting. It was uncomfortable, designed more for appearance than practicality, but protocol demanded it for official farewells. The departure gate was already busy with activity. His belongings had been transferred earlier, his credentials verified, his travel authorization confirmed through multiple channels. Everything was in order. Everything was proceeding smoothly. Until it wasn't. Ambassador Voss, the guard commander, approached with the kind of apologetic expression that Nathan had learned meant trouble. "I'm afraid there's been a complication with your departure authorization." Nathan felt something cold settle into his stomach. What kind of complication? "Your travel clearance has been rescinded by royal decree. You're to return to the palace immediately for audience with Queen Lysa." For a long moment, Nathan couldn't process what he was hearing. "That's not possible. My authorization was confirmed this morning. Earth is expecting me." "I understand, Ambassador. However, the Queen's authority supersedes all prior clearances." The commander gestured toward a waiting transport. "If you'll please come with me." It wasn't really a request. Nathan found himself surrounded by royal guard, polite but absolutely firm, as they escorted him back through the spaceport. His mind raced through possibilities. Technical error, security threat, some last-minute complication with the trade agreements. None of it made sense. Everything had been finalized. His mission was complete. The transport carried him back through the city in silence. Nathan tried to contact the Earth consulate but found his communications mysteriously unavailable. Not blocked, the system informed him pleasantly. Just temporarily restricted pending royal clearance. The cold feeling in his stomach solidified into genuine alarm. The palace's formal throne room was a space he'd only seen during major ceremonies. Vast, crystalline, designed to remind everyone who entered of the power and majesty of the Kitharan throne. Lysa sat at its center, elevated on the royal seat, wearing the full regalia of her office. The crown that she usually avoided now rested on her head, its living crystal pulsing with soft light. Around her stood members of the High Council, advisors and various officials whose functions Nathan had never quite figured out. It was wrong. All of it. This wasn't how Lysa operated, surrounding herself with formal pomp and rigid hierarchy. This was the version of her that only appeared for the most critical state functions. Ambassador Nathan Voss of Earth. The herald's voice echoed through the chamber. Approach the throne. Nathan walked forward, his footsteps loud in the silent room. He stopped at the designated distance and gave the formal bow that protocol required. When he straightened, he met Lysa's eyes and found them carefully, deliberately blank. Ambassador Voss, your request for departure has been reviewed by the throne. Her voice was formal, carrying none of the warmth he'd grown accustomed to. It has been determined that your continued presence on Verindel Prime serves vital diplomatic interests. Your departure authorization is hereby suspended indefinitely. The room remained silent. Nathan felt like he'd been punched. Your Majesty, I don't understand. My mission is complete. The trade agreements are only the beginning of a complex diplomatic relationship. One of the advisors stepped forward, a stern-faced woman whose name Nathan couldn't remember. Ongoing negotiations require Earth's representative to remain accessible. There are security considerations, cultural exchange programs that need oversight. The matter is not open for debate. I need to contact Earth, Nathan said, fighting to keep his voice level. They're expecting my return. They need to be informed. Earth will be notified through appropriate channels. Lysa's tone hadn't changed, hadn't softened. You will be provided comfortable quarters in the palace. Your needs will be met. This audience is concluded. Nathan wanted to argue, wanted to demand real answers, but the guards were already moving forward. Not threatening, just present, making it clear that the decision was final. He managed one more look at Lysa before being escorted out, and this time he caught it, a flash of something in her expression that broke through the regal mask. Something that looked like fear, or desperation, or both. The quarters they took him to were in a different wing of the palace, larger and more luxurious than his previous rooms. There was a sitting area, a bedroom with a view of the gardens, even a small office space. Everything was beautiful, everything was comfortable, everything was a cage. Nathan tried his communications again and found them still restricted. He could send messages to palace staff, could order food or request services, but anything beyond the palace network was unavailable pending royal authorization that never seemed to come. He pulled up the Earth diplomatic protocols, searching for procedures for handling improper detention of personnel. The language was complicated, designed for hostile situations, not for being politely imprisoned by an ally. He paced his rooms as evening fell, turning over everything that had happened. The formal setting, the public audience, his door chimed. Nathan turned, half expecting more guards with more restrictions. Instead, a palace servant entered with a tray of food and a sealed message. From Her Majesty, the servant said quietly. She asked that I deliver it personally. Nathan took the message cube after the servant left. Unlike the formal communication from yesterday, this one bore no official seals or markers. He activated it with trembling fingers. Lysa's voice was barely above a whisper. Nathan, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. I can't explain yet, not properly. But please believe me when I say that I had reasons. Just, please don't hate me. That's all I ask. The message ended. Nathan replayed it 3 times, listening to the vulnerability in her voice, the fear, the desperate hope that he might understand something she couldn't yet explain. He set the cube down carefully and returned to the window. The transport ship that should have carried him home would launch in 2 days. Without him, Earth would receive whatever official explanation the Kitharan government provided. His career was probably over, his reputation damaged by mysterious detention on an alien world. And somehow, listening to that message, none of that felt as important as the question that kept circling through his mind. What could possibly have driven Lysa to do this? A week passed in comfortable imprisonment. Nathan was free to move throughout the palace, to use most facilities, to interact with staff, and even some lower-level officials. But any attempt to leave the grounds was politely blocked, and his communications remained restricted to internal networks. Requests for formal audience with the Queen were acknowledged and then quietly ignored. He was stuck in diplomatic limbo, officially an honored guest but functionally a prisoner. He tried to stay angry. Anger was easier than the alternative, which was trying to understand why someone he'd trusted would trap him here with vague explanations and royal authority. But anger required energy, and as the days stretched on, what he felt mostly was confused and hurt and increasingly determined to get real answers. The palace staff were sympathetic but tight-lipped. The few officials he managed to corner gave him the same rehearsed explanations about ongoing negotiations and diplomatic complications. It was clear they'd been instructed not to engage with his questions. Only Tern seemed genuinely troubled by the situation, but even the old counselor claimed ignorance of the Queen's true motivations. "She's been different since your detention began," Tern admitted during one of their carefully casual encounters in the gardens. "More withdrawn. She attends council meetings but seems distracted. Several advisors have expressed concern." "Then maybe she should explain what's actually happening," Nathan said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "Instead of hiding behind royal decrees and bureaucratic deflection." Tern's ears tilted sympathetically. "The throne can be a lonely position, Nathan. Sometimes those who sit upon it make choices that seem incomprehensible to others. That doesn't make the choices right, but it may make them understandable." Nathan wanted to ask what that meant, but Tern had already moved on, leaving him with more questions than answers. He started testing the boundaries of his confinement more aggressively. Not attempting escape. He wasn't actually sure he wanted to escape yet, which was its own kind of problem, but exploring, observing, trying to piece together what was really happening. He noticed that Queen Lysa had canceled several public appearances, that the High Council was meeting more frequently than normal, that there seemed to be tension between the advisors who had backed his detention and those who thought it was a diplomatic disaster waiting to happen. He also noticed the guards outside his quarters changing shifts with unusual frequency. Someone was watching him carefully, though whether to keep him in or to keep others away, he couldn't determine. 10 days after his failed departure, Nathan woke to find his door unsealed and no guards in the corridor. For a moment he thought it might be a test or a trap. Then he saw the small crystal marker on his threshold, the kind Lysa used to leave when she wanted to meet somewhere privately, away from official channels. He found her in the gardens, in a small alcove where they'd spent many evenings talking during his official posting. She was alone, without guards or advisors, wearing simple robes instead of court dress. Her long ears were pressed back against her head in an expression of distress that Nathan had learned to recognize. She looked exhausted. "You came," she said quietly when he approached. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't." Nathan stopped a careful distance away, not sure if he wanted to close the gap or maintain it. "You want to tell me what's really going on? The truth this time, not the official story." Lysa's hands twisted together, a nervous gesture he'd never seen her make in public. "The official story is exactly that, a story. There are no ongoing negotiations that require your presence, no security complications, no valid diplomatic reason to keep you here." "Then why?" She looked up at him, and what he saw in her eyes made his anger falter. She looked vulnerable in a way that seemed almost painful, like armor stripped away to reveal something tender underneath. "Because I couldn't let you leave," she said simply. "Because in 18 months of being queen, of being surrounded by people who only see the crown and never the person underneath, you were the only one who treated me like Lysa, who argued with me when you thought I was wrong, who made me laugh when council meetings went too long, who saw me." Her voice cracked slightly. "And I knew that if you got on that ship I'd never see you again. The mission would be over. Earth would assign you somewhere else. And I'd be alone again with everyone calling me Your Majesty and no one actually knowing who I am." Nathan felt something shift in his chest. anger dissolving into something more complicated. "So you trapped me here, used your authority to keep me from leaving." Yes, she didn't flinch from it. It was selfish. It was probably cruel. It was absolutely an abuse of power. I know all of that. But I did it anyway because the alternative was losing the one genuine connection I've had since my father died, and I inherited this impossible responsibility. The gardens were quiet around them, bioluminescent flowers casting soft light on both their faces. Nathan tried to process what he was hearing, tried to reconcile it with his anger and confusion and the growing realization that somewhere in the past 18 months, Lysa had become more important to him than he'd wanted to admit. "You should have talked to me," he said finally. "Before the royal decree, before the public humiliation and the detention, you should have just asked. Would you have stayed if I'd asked?" The question hung between them. Nathan opened his mouth to say of course not, that duty came first, that he had obligations to Earth. But the words wouldn't come because he honestly didn't know the answer. Would he have stayed? If Lysa had asked personally and honestly, would he have chosen to remain? "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "Maybe, but now I'll never know because you didn't give me the choice." Lysa nodded, seeming to shrink into herself. "I know, and I'm sorry, truly." She pulled something from her robes, a crystal authorization card bearing the royal seal. "This is full clearance. Communications, travel, everything. You can contact Earth right now. Leave tomorrow if you want. I won't stop you. I shouldn't have stopped you in the first place." She held out the card. Nathan stared at it, then at her, seeing the resignation in her expression. She expected him to take it and leave. Expected him to hate her now that the truth was out. The smart thing would be to do exactly that. Take the clearance, contact Earth, get the first transport off this world. Salvage what he could of his career and chalk this up to a diplomatic nightmare that he'd somehow survived. Instead, Nathan heard himself ask, "What if I stayed anyway?" Lysa's head snapped up. "What?" "Not as your prisoner. Not because you ordered it, but because." He trailed off, surprised by his own words but discovering they felt right. "What if I chose to stay?" They walked through the gardens for hours that night, talking in a way they hadn't been able to since his detention began. Honest, careful, both of them navigating territory that protocols and positions never prepared them for. Nathan kept waiting for his anger to return, for the sense of betrayal to overwhelm whatever else he was feeling. It never quite did. "I shouldn't have kept you here," Lysa said again as they sat beside one of the glowing pools. "It was wrong. I knew it was wrong even as I gave the order." "Yeah, it was pretty spectacularly wrong," Nathan agreed. "The whole royal decree thing was a bit much. Very dramatic. Though I suppose that's the downside of absolute authority. When you make mistakes, they're really big mistakes." She almost smiled. "Is this the part where you tell me how Earth's democracy is superior?" "Nah, I've learned better than that. Your system works for you, our system works for us, mostly, when it's not busy being a complete disaster." He paused. "But I am curious about something. When did you decide to do this? When did keeping me here go from random thought to actual plan?" Lysa was quiet for a long moment, her long ears tilted forward in concentration. "Do you remember the night we argued about the trade agreement's military provisions? You thought they were too restrictive. I thought they were necessary safeguards. You were incredibly stubborn about it. I believe I called you pig-headed at one point, which probably should have gotten me expelled from the planet. You did, and I should have been furious." She smiled at the memory, but instead I was relieved. Because everyone else in that room was agreeing with me out of deference or fear or political calculation, and you were the only one actually engaging with the ideas instead of the crown. And when you finally convinced me you were right, when I changed the provisions based on your arguments, I realized something. "What?" "That I'd started looking forward to seeing you. That your opinions mattered to me, not because of your position but because of who you are. That somewhere in all these formal negotiations and diplomatic protocols, I'd started to care about you." She looked at him directly. That night, when you left the conference room still arguing your points, I thought about what it would be like when you eventually left Verindel Prime, and I felt something close to panic. Nathan absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. So you've been planning my detention for months. Not planning, exactly. Dreading. Trying to figure out how to ask you to stay without making it weird or complicated or a diplomatic incident. She laughed quietly without humor. I succeeded at the not asking part, failed spectacularly at everything else. Yeah, you really did. Nathan picked up a small crystal from the path, watching it glow in his palm. Can I ask you something? And I need you to be completely honest. Always. Do you actually want me to stay, or do you just want to not be lonely? He looked at her. Because those are different things, Lysa. One is about me. The other is just about filling a gap with whoever happens to be available. She met his gaze steadily. I want you to stay. You specifically, Nathan Voss, who makes terrible jokes during serious meetings, who gets excited about bioluminescent flora like a kid seeing magic for the first time, who listens when I talk about the weight of ruling without trying to fix me or tell me I'm doing it wrong, who saw me as a person before he ever saw me as a queen. She paused. So yes, it's about you, but I understand if that's not enough, if what I did was too much to forgive. Nathan turned the crystal over in his hands, feeling its warmth. He thought about Earth, about the career he'd built, about the expectations that had driven him for so long. He thought about the transport ship that had left without him, carrying his official departure back to a world that suddenly felt very far away. Then he thought about the past 18 months, the late-night conversations that ran long because neither of them wanted to end them. The shared laughter over cultural misunderstandings that became inside jokes. The quiet moments when they'd simply enjoyed each other's company without needing to fill the silence. The growing realization that he'd been dreading his departure as much as she had, but had been too committed to duty to acknowledge it. I need to contact Earth, he said finally. Lysa's expression fell, resignation settling into her features. Wait, let me finish. I need to contact Earth and tell them I'm requesting an extension of my assignment. No royal decrees, no forced detention. Just a human diplomat choosing to stay because the work here matters, because the relationships here matter. Nathan, I'm not done. He smiled at her. I'm also going to need actual quarters that aren't in the detention wing. And my full communication privileges restored. And maybe an official position that doesn't involve being anyone's prisoner. If I'm staying properly. Lysa stared at him. You're actually staying. Did you miss the part where I said I was requesting an extension? He handed her the crystal. But I'm doing it by choice, Lysa. My choice, not your order. That distinction matters. It does. She held the crystal carefully like it might break. I can give you everything you're asking for. Position, quarters, full diplomatic status. But Nathan, are you sure? Your career, Earth's expectations. We'll be fine. I'll explain the situation honestly. Request 6 more months, with option to extend if needed. Earth's not going to recall me when the alternative is restarting negotiations from scratch with someone new. He paused. Besides, I realized something while I was being your very comfortable prisoner. What's that? I wasn't eager to go home. I was following the script, doing what was expected, checking the boxes of career advancement. But somewhere along the way, home stopped being Earth and started being. He gestured at the gardens around them. Here, this place, these conversations, you. Lysa set down the crystal and did something she'd never done before. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm and her long ears had tilted forward in an expression he'd learned meant hope. I don't know what this is, she said quietly. What we are. It's not part of any protocol I've ever studied. Good, Nathan said. Because honestly, I'm tired of protocols. Let's just figure it out as we go. They sat together by the glowing pool, while the twin moons rose overhead, and the gardens hummed with bioluminescent life. Nathan composed the message to Earth in his head. knowing it would raise questions and probably complicate things, but not really caring anymore. Some decisions couldn't be made by committee or justified in official reports. Some decisions you just had to make because they felt right. "So," Lysa said after a while, "what do we do now?" Nathan squeezed her hand gently. Now I teach you that card game I keep threatening to introduce you to. The one that makes absolutely no sense, but is incredibly fun anyway." "That sounds suspiciously like you're just making up rules to win." "I would never, that would be cheating." "You absolutely would. That's practically your defining characteristic." "See, you know me so well already." He grinned. "Come on, Your Majesty. Let's go be thoroughly unprofessional and play cards on your fancy royal balcony." She stood, pulling him up with her. "Stop calling me that." "What, Your Majesty? But it's so formal and respectful." "Nathan." Okay, Lysa it is." He kept hold of her hand as they walked back toward the palace. "Though I reserve the right to use Your Majesty when you're being particularly stubborn." "That seems fair. I'll use ambassador when you're being insufferable." "So constantly." "Exactly." They walked through the glowing gardens, and for the first time in weeks, Nathan felt like he could breathe properly. The mission was over, but something else was beginning, something that didn't have protocols or procedures or diplomatic frameworks. Something that was just them, figuring out what happened when duty stepped aside and choice took over. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of grand romantic gesture that stories were built on. It was quieter than that, more real and infinitely more valuable. Two people choosing each other, choosing to stay, choosing to see what happened when the scripts were thrown away and they were allowed to just be. As they reached the palace, Lysa stopped and looked at him seriously. "Thank you for staying, for forgiving me for the detention disaster, for giving this a chance." "Thank you for being honest," Nathan replied, "even when it was hard, even when you thought I'd hate you for it." He smiled. "Though next time you're feeling lonely or panicked about someone leaving, maybe just tell them, before the royal decree situation." "I'll keep that in mind." She paused at the entrance. "Cards on the balcony." "Cards on the balcony. Fair warning, I'm undefeated at this game." "You invented it. That's not an achievement." "It absolutely is. Shows creativity and strategic thinking." "It shows you're a cheater who makes up rules." They bickered their way through the palace corridors, and Nathan realized he was laughing, really laughing, for the first time since his detention began. Whatever happened next, however Earth responded, however they navigated the complicated reality of a human diplomat and an alien queen trying to figure out a relationship that defied easy categorization, they'd figure it out together. The transport ship was gone, carrying his old life back to Earth without him. But here, in the glowing heart of Verindel Prime, with Lysa's hand in his and terrible card games waiting on a royal balcony, Nathan discovered he didn't miss it. Some missions you completed and moved on from. Others, the important ones, you chose to extend. Not because you had to, but because walking away from them would mean leaving behind something irreplaceable. He'd come to Verindel Prime to negotiate a trade agreement. He was staying because somewhere in 18 months of protocol and duty, he'd found something worth more than any career